Hello lads, thanks for stopping by. To any new viewers, welcome to the Terror Dome, baby. In today's video, we're going to be discussing one of the most complex, rewarding, and dynamic parts of Path of Exile, a personal favorite and love of mine, crafting. In a slight departure from my normal focus, however, this video will be a crash course, so to speak, on the basic or foundational elements of this part of the game. And this video will be well suited to any skill or experience level. Before we dive into the bulk of the video, I want to quickly thank you guys for the overwhelmingly positive feedback and support that you guys showed me on my most recent video. It completely reinvigorated my sense of purpose in making these guides, and I clearly misjudged how important certain elements of content creation were. And knowing now that I was the only wall that stood before me has cleared my field of vision in a way that I can now have something to clearly work towards. Taking into account your suggestions, for this video, I have purchased and set up a new microphone with a new mic arm, which you can probably see in front of me here, to help reduce environmental noise. I've added visual aids throughout this video, chosen a more accessible and universal topic, written a script which is directly in front of me, and of course, as with our last video, our fancy new 4K camera. Additionally, I have typed out an extended and more neatly organized version of the script that I'm following throughout this into a Google document, which will be linked below the video in the description. I read quite a few comments from ESL or English Second Language viewers mentioning that they were experiencing some difficulty keeping up with my pace or my word choice at times. My thinking was that the document will allow you a backup to, that you can Google Translate into your native language, or you could just read at your own pace, and that way everyone can fully understand the video. Additionally, it can also provide the benefit of having a tool to quickly consult in the future, if anyone's interested in doing so. Thank you again, guys, for the ongoing support, feedback, and kindness most of you have shown me in this process of me leveling up as a content creator. To anyone new to the channel, if you enjoy or get any value from this video, throwing a like on the video and subscribing to the channel would, as always, be much appreciated. Well, that's enough of the mushy stuff. Let's get back to that goddamn crafting. For this video, I'll be breaking down crafting into its most simplistic, basal form, with the intent of providing a framework for progressing through the learning curve in a semi-structured fashion. In that spirit, the video will be broken down into three basic parts, and accordingly as will crafting. Those three parts, as you can see here, are itemization, specialization, and methodology. Part 1. Itemization. If I may indulge in a metaphor before I begin, before one may put a pen to pad, he must first learn to read. This is the outlook and the approach that one should take when tackling the primary stage of the crafting learning curve. Itemization, loosely defined, is the process by which one understands the basic and elementary functions of different items, how to distinguish between them, and the applications that each provides. This part of the learning process, perhaps surprisingly, will largely take place outside of any formalized crafting process. If you are a beginner or an early stage novice, the primary means by which you will develop this skill set is by identifying, making mental notes of, drops from monsters. There are tools which can assist in this process, such as loot filters, a studious mind, and certain crafting guides. However, by and large, this step will occur subconsciously with time and with experience playing the game. For now, we will allow items to come to us, rather than having them come from us. A more reactive approach. This will expose you to a far more diversified set of outcomes, devoid of any expectation. As a result, your ability to parse through items will dramatically increase. By understanding what are desirable base types and modifier combinations, you will progressively learn what you should and should not pick up, identify, and similarly, what you should or should not assign inventory space to, and eventually sell on the trade website. Once you have a firm grasp of this initial stage, will be ready to shift from the reactive to the proactive. The process of determining what and how things will come from us rather than to us or at us is crafting. The following are markers or elements of items that one should have a firm grasp and understanding of before proceeding. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to want to make a note of are the base items. There are 4 basic items in Path of Exile, item categorizations. And those are weapons and offhands, armor, jewelry, and jewels. As you can see here, I've laid out all of these to help indicate them just on a quick basis. Obviously, these are not exhaustive, but just to highlight as we go here. So the first thing you're going to want to know is a weapon type. You know, is it a two-handed, one-handed weapon, axe, sword, bow, wand, etc. You're going to want to make note of the base attack speed or the attacks per second. And you're also going to want to make note of the base damage type. So by default, weapons are physical, attack-based weapons. Actually, so are wands. However, obviously, prefixes can adjust those in the future. But paying attention to the base damage type is particularly important if you are playing a physical build, because there are varying different kinds of one-handed axes, for example, that we're hovered over now, that can have varying different crit elements, different attack speed base points, different flat fizz modifiers, and all of these are relevant into understanding which is the the primary base that you should be pursuing within that class or categorization. Now, the second thing you want to make note of are your armor types. So energy shield, armor, evasion, hybrid, ward. In this case here, this is a pure ES chest. What you are next going to want to pay attention to are the defenses that are offered, as well as understanding what the advantages and drawbacks of each one are. So in this one, again, it is energy shield. And the next thing that you're going to want to pay attention to when you're looking at armor is the base percentile. When you hold Alt and hover over the item as we are here, you can see that it says energy shield 83. And then in brackets beside that, it says 75 to 88. That is your base percentile. You want to get one to 100%, and that's particularly important for energy shield and for ward items. If you're doing just brand new crafting league start, this is not very important. However, if you have the option between the two, of course, it's something that you should learn to identify. With certain valuable base types, things like Vol Regalias, Sorcerer Boots, or any of the runic gear for ward, finding items that have a 100% base percentile can actually be worth quite a bit. So it is something that you should be cognizant of, irrespective if you're going to eventually craft on them or not. When it comes to jewelry, that refers to rings, amulets, and belts. They don't have any base attributes associated with them. Therefore, they simply need to be judged on by virtue of their implicit modifiers. For example, an iron ring gives 1 to 4 flat fizz. A jade amulet gives dexterity, and a studded belt gives a stun duration on enemies. Jewels can be one of 4 different kinds or base types. So you've got your base jewels, right? That would be a prismatic, cobalt, crimson, and viridian. Second type you have are timeless jewels. The third kind of jewel are abyss jewels. And the fourth kind are cluster jewels. Another thing that is important to make note of for all item types are attribute and level requirements. The next thing that you're going to want to make note of is the item level. Item level can be a somewhat confusing concept at first. However, as dropped items, item level will correspond with the zone level and difficulty. It largely becomes a moot point once you have reached a later stage part of progression. Understanding key breakpoints for popular modifiers of your base item type will dictate what is a good and what is a bad item level. By and large, the higher the item level, the better, but there are certain instances where having a restricted item level can make getting desired modifiers easier. The next thing you're going to want to pay attention to is the item's rarity. A normal item can have no explicit modifiers. A magic item can have upwards of 2, 1 prefix and 1 suffix, and rare items can have upwards of 6, with 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. Unique items have a predetermined set of affixes that typically roll within a range. Do note, though, there are some base types, for example, simplex amulets, that do not fall within traditional modifier cap limits. The next thing you're going to want to pay attention to, guys, are the implicit modifiers. While these can actually manifest at later stages as some of the most advanced, expensive, and difficult to obtain elements of a craft, at the basal level, implicit modifiers can provide an additional incentive or utility to a base item that provides some competitive advantage or use case compared to its alternatives, despite potentially having lower base attributes. Think about something like two-tone or fugitive boots, where they have the chaos res or the dual resistances. The next thing you're going to want to pay attention to are sockets, colors, and links. Sockets and links are an incredibly important part of any build, as they enable the use of skill and support gems. However, the process of obtaining the desired amount of either at almost any stage of crafting has largely been made superfluous in contemporary PoE. Outside of 6-socket and 6-link vendor sales in the early league, not too much mind needs to be paid here until much a later stage in the process. The sixth thing that we're going to want to pay attention to are enchants. Enchants are a bit more of an advanced and typically player-driven element of base item types. In essence, it's rare to find items that are enchanted without doing so yourself. Heist blueprints being the exception, really. However, they can be very important. Enchants augment the subsequent or pre-existing modifiers of an item in a certain way, often with some kind of trade-off. They're most commonly present on weapons and body armors. However, they do exist elsewhere. Now, to the important stuff. Prefixes. Prefixes are the first or upper 3 modifiers or affixes that will appear on rare items. On weapons, these are typically damage-focused modifiers, including flat attack and spell damage mods, and their corresponding increases. On armor, prefixes are typically focused around EHP sources, things like life, energy shield, armor, evasion, etc. Breaking an item visually or mentally into sort of 3 sub-items or sub-categorizations can help quickly assess the strength of a found item, as each of these 3 sub-items can be isolated and worked upon independently in most cases. These 3 sort of sub-item assessments, as I refer to it, would be looking at the base and the implicits of an item, the prefixes, and then the suffixes. If you find an item that has perfection in one of those 3 categories, that is a very good item to look into, pick up, or potentially craft upon. And for the final thing that we're going to be looking at here for part 1 of itemization are the suffixes, of course. Suffixes are very similar to prefixes, simply the inverse role. They are the last 3 modifiers or affixes that appear on rare items, and they typically focus around some kind of secondary function or utility. On weapons, that's often things like cast or attack speed, crit modifiers, extra arrows, double damage, etc. And similarly, they focus on secondary elements on armor, as well as on jewelry, things like resistances, attributes, stuff like that. When an item has all of the above 8 things accounted for, you have a completed item. The degree to which those modifiers are interdependent or symbiotic, along with their relative rarity and strength, will determine the overall power of an item. And typically, with that power will come a corresponding value with an open trade market existing in the game. Alright, on to part 2, specializations or categorizations. If part 1 of the video were to analogously be viewed through the lens of PoE, it would be kind of like selecting your character class. If that were the case, think of this part 2 as selecting an ascendancy. These are simply sub-categorizations of items, some of which bear mutual exclusivity, that further augment and improve the items that they bear their specialization. Similar to Ascendancies, it is not mandatory to have one of the following specializations. However, 99.9% of high-end items will take advantage of at least of one of their systems or unique functionality. To my left here, you can see that I've put up a list of the 12 things we're going to cover here. However, some of those are really just there for, semantics sake. The real major categorical ones that you need to pay attention to are as follows: Eldritch, Fracture, Influence, Synthesis, and Corrupted mods. This chart is something that I can explain further in a more advanced video, but looking at a quick glance here, it simply shows the relationship between different ones and if they have if they are mutually exclusive. So Fracture can be done to an Eldritch. This league, Fracture can be done to an Influence item. However, an Eldritch item cannot be influenced, an influenced item cannot be synthesized, a synthesized item cannot be turned into an Eldritch item. All of the upper items can be turned into a corrupted item, but a corrupted item cannot be turned into the upper items. That, in short, is what that chart shows. But again, we can cover that in a more advanced video sometime. Breaking down the different categorizations here, I've also lined up different items just to demonstrate as we go through. So the first one is a split item. This simply applies a tag to an item indicating that cannot be split an additional time thereafter. There are 3 different ways to split items, which are a Phenomenal Plagued Arachnid, which will split it into 2. A Phenomenal Plagued Arachnid with a Black Morgan, which will split it into 3. And a Fracturing Fossil, which will split it into 2, but will also re-roll it. So you can see here, it just gets that tag on the bottom of the item. It doesn't prevent anything else other than the item from being split an additional time. The next thing we're looking at is Fracture. Fracturing an item, or finding a fractured item, will irreversibly lock one modifier in place, irrespective of any subsequent changes made to that item. So in the case of this one here, you can see we have armor is increased by overcapped fire resistance. It does not matter what I do or craft on that item, that mod will always stay there, and it will not be able to be augmented. The third type of item is a synthesis item. Synthesis modifies the implicits of an item, changing the pre-existing or non-existent implicit combination into either 1, 2, or 3 synthesis-specific implicits. Since the inclusion of Vivid Vultures via beast crafting, it has become possible to specifically tailor these implicits to whatever you choose, foregoing the vast variance that would normally present itself from what would have previously been a dropped synthesis item. Or better phrased, a very lucky drop synthesis item. This can be incredibly expensive. However, it is widely considered to be the most powerful endgame focused type of crafting when done to its maximum potential. The gap between a random 1 modifier implicit synth item and a tailor-made 3 implicit modifier synth item is enormous. Because of this and the costs associated with crafting this way, I would highly recommend that if you are a new or novice player, you steer clear of crafting this way, at least while you are learning the systems. The example item I have here up on the screen is the mirror bow that we crafted this league. This cost myself 78 mirrors to craft this in the temporary league. For some context. Most of that was actually on the explicits, but the synth mods are not cheap. Alright, the next item type we're moving on to are influenced mods. Influenced items refers to anything that has either Shaper, Elder, Hunter, Warlord, Crusader, or Redeemer influence on it. These provide a unique series of prefixes and suffixes to their corresponding item types. All base items, with the exception of jewels, can have an influence. The vast majority of items can have 2 different influences, with each unlocking the modifiers their influence provides to that item. These are often significantly stronger than the base affixes that are possible on a certain item type. Furthermore, they can greatly change the function or the use case for a certain item. The example I have to my left here is a recent craft of ours. where we have 4 elevated influence modifiers. You can see we have Redeemer elevated, Crusader elevated, Redeemer elevated, and Redeemer elevated. So that's an example right there where we have 2 different influence types, and where that has a drastic impact on the functionality and the cost as well, I should say, of that item. Now, the next type of item are Eldritch items. Eldritch items are those that have Eldritch implicits. Surprise, surprise. Of which there are categorically only 2. It's either Eater of Worlds or Searing Exarch. Eldritch items, aside from having a unique series of implicits corresponding to their influence type, either Eater or Searing, additionally have several crafting currencies that allow for unique and often better / more deterministic ways to craft the explicits of those items. Furthermore, unlike influenced items or synthesis items, Eldritch items can also be fractured. For this reason, these crafts are typically considered to be the easiest and the most beginner-friendly. If you were to rank them there, I would say Fracture would be the most basic, followed by Eldritch. Now, naturally, if you had Eldritch with Fracture, that would supersede that. Influence being somewhere in the middle, and Synthesis being the most advanced. With the example we have here for our item type in the game, again, staying on the theme of grasping males, we have the double Eldritch item here, a double Eldritch implicits rather, with 30% Grace Aura effect, 20% non-curse Aura effect, and then, of course, our affixes elsewhere being what they are. All right, the next item type we are going to discuss here on the list are corrupted items. Corrupted items are those upon which a Vol Orb or a Locus of Corruption have been used. Most often, this is done in the pursuit of a unique series of corrupted implicits, in each case affording a 1 in 4 possibility of happening. The Vol Orb will give 1 implicit and a Locus of Corruption giving 2 implicits. All items can be corrupted, with the exception of mirrored items or already corrupted items, scourged items, and unidentified items. However, that relationship is one way. With the exception of some specialized tainted currencies, once an item is corrupted, it will no longer be able to be crafted upon. The example item we have here is a Hubris Circlet, which you can see has 18% Fizz taken as Chaos. As well, we've got the +2 Aura, +2 AoE, and +1 Int on the explicits. And you can see here we corrupted on +2 AoE gems. On top of the Eldritch, replacing a Gilded Fossil. That allows this helmet to have +7 to the auras that we're going after. So those could be quite strong. All right. Now, the 7th type of item that we're going to be discussing are mirrored items. A mirrored item is one which bears the tag mirrored as a result of being a carbon copy of a primary and identical item. These can drop naturally occasionally from certain mob types. However, in a practical sense, it will refer to items that have been created by using a Mirror of Calandra on a source item, with that original item typically being referred to as a mirror craft. While mirror versions of the items are identical, they cannot be modified in any way, at any point in the future. This includes sockets, colors, links, enchants, bench mods, etc. A mirrored item is final. The only exception to this are rings and amulets, which can have their anointments added or changed while they are mirrored because of a special oil type. For the example of mirrored items here, you can see both of these jewels have the mirrored tag on the bottom, as does my ring here, as does this chest piece. Now, the next item we're going to be discussing is a crucible item. Crucible items are ones that have a special crucible tree. Now, these are only applicable in standard, so as a result, I have put together a little photo here so we don't have to log out. And to my left, you'll be able to see what a crucible item is. The further left photo, you see the orange lines on the bottom of the thing, and if you hold Alt, it elaborates with the modifiers to the same item closer to my side here. These apply only to shields and to weapons, and were specific to the league bearing the same name. Accordingly, they're only available on Standard, as the Crucible mechanic was not made part of the core game. It is still important to be aware of their existence and function, however, as even as a temporary league-only player, as their existence makes any non-Crucible weapon or shield comparably worthless in Standard once the leagues end up merging, as they are orders of magnitude more strong or stronger than non-Crucible items, and they are not able to be made through any modern means. You can't recombinate a Crucible weapon or shield onto something else. If you don't have the original base type from the Crucible League, you are SOL. This can impact other players' willingness to purchase high-end items or mirror crafts the further you go into a league, as they, in essence, have manufactured obsolescence cooked in. Meaning that if you have a very valuable weapon or shield in a temp league, the further it gets to the end of the league, the less value it will have in a comparable sense. Because even if you don't care about Standard, it's a consideration that other people might have. And because they can say, oh, I can get one that's, 60% better and it's 1/5 the cost on Standard, probably maybe not going to buy this one in the league right now. So, it's not something you have to factor in, but it is something that you should be aware of at least, so that you can understand and address that phenomena accordingly. It is never a bad idea to be more informed. All right, now, the next item type that we're going to be talking about, as you can see on the list here, is Scourged. And similar to Crucible, these are Standard-only items. So we're going to have to pull up a photo again here, and we can see an example of a Scourged item. The Death's Door boots here, you can see, are corrupted with the +1 endurance charge, giving them both +2. But the orange text above them is a Scourge modifier. Scourge items are from the league bearing the same name. They are a quasi-corrupted modifier that has multiple tiers that come with some fairly unpredictable upsides and downsides. They were never really adopted at large in the game, though, and it's quite rare to see them in any use case outside of simple collections, even on Standard. And they aren't available in leagues at all. For all intents and purposes, they're functionally similar to corrupted items in that they can be augmented with tainted currencies and certain bench crafts. And the real lasting legacy of that league was the implementation of tainted currency, not so much the Scourge items themselves. The next type of item that we're going to be discussing, and even though this might seem silly to mention, is an unidentified item. It is technically its own category since it can't be augmented or changed or whatever. But this one, very simple solution. Use a scroll of wisdom. Voila. Moving on. The next type of item, and again, we did mention this in part 1 too when we talked about rarity, but that would be a unique item. And there's the example of a unique item, although I'm sure most of you know what one is. And while unique items are technically a rarity, it is, and pardon the pun, unique in that it may not have its rarity or affixes changed from those specific to that unique item. This would only happen without absolute intent if you were using a chance orb, so it's unlikely to ever merit any additional consideration. What I mean from that is that, if you have a rare item, magic, or normal item, you can always change it to one of those 3 states. They can be juggled back and forth. But once a base type or a base item is turned into a unique item, it can't be reverted back unless you corrupt it and the corruption bricks and it goes rare. But in that case, you also can't augment it further with the exception of tainted currency. And so, again, the only way that would ever happen accidentally is if for some reason you are using chance orbs as in lieu of, I don't know, alchemies or alterations. But again, it's such an outlying situation that I wouldn't really give it too much consideration there. But just for the sake of being thorough, it's worth mentioning on my end. All right, now the last type of item is a locked item. When a Hinakora's lock is used on an item, it gains a purple tint. I can show you guys a photo of that here. Boom. If you take a look there at the glimpse of chaos on the further left, you'll notice at the bottom where it says corrupted, then there's the orange text. There will then be a little purple triangle, and I'm not sure if you can tell that easily in the photo, but the item itself will get kind of a light purple hue. Until the item is modified in some way, it will be able to forecast the would-be outcome of any given currency type were you to click. So you can hover over, and it will show you, as you can see in the second photo, I am hovering over with the Vol Orb. It's very tiny, the Vol Orb there, but you can see I'm not actually clicking, and you can see it is going to predict the outcome. Due to the rarity cost and clear visual indicator of Hinakora's locks, it's very unlikely that you will ever forget that an item is in this state, but do be cautious if you do lock something and don't immediately decide upon an outcome, because any augmentation of that item will remove the forecasting effect of that lock. And that brings us to the end of part 2, Specialization. Moving on from there to part 3, we are going to be discussing methodology, or in other words, the crafting systems. These crafting systems are simply different ways, interfaces, methods, however you want to refer to it, to craft an item into its desired state. Each has with it some unique benefit that would favor its use case in certain situations, although rarely are there situations where it is mandatory to use it for a certain method or approach. As they say, there are many ways to skin a cat. Finding the best approach will come down to a matter of preference, opportunity cost, experience, and forethought and planning. Making a rush decision here can exponentially increase the cost, time, and difficulty of a craft. Take the time to think things through. Even if it is a slow process at first, speed will come with practice and it will come with experience. For the different methodologies here, we can just go through. I'll move myself over because there's quite a few of them. Rather than run around my hideout and show them to you, because that'll take a few minutes, I just decided to put a little slideshow together here. So when we're looking at the different kinds of methodologies, the first one we have is delve or fossil crafting. The second one would be harvest bench crafting. The third being necropolis or the graveyard. The fourth method being vendor recipes. This is obviously a very, very minute part of the crafting experience. However, there are certain things that can be crafted thusly. Beast crafting, one of my personal favorites. Meta crafting or bench crafting, probably the most user-friendly. Recombinators, now these are on standard only. Probably one of the more interesting and crazily OP and wild ride crafting devices or systems that they've ever implemented in this game. You then have veiled modifiers, or these are coming from June or the Syndicate. These days they are expressed through a veiled orb. You have anointments. While these aren't technically crafted, they provide an enchant to a jewelry item. However, it does have its own system and it does go through Kasha. Similarly, catalysts, they increase the quality of jewelry. Not exactly its own crafting system, but again, it does augment the item, so bears worth mentioning. You then have enchants. These can come from one of two sources, either heist items, so tailoring or tempering orbs, or finding one in heist, or you can also get them through harvest bench. The next type would be eldritch crafting. That's the process of using the greater or the eldritch ichors or the searing arch. Oh my god, searing exarch or the eater of worlds ichors, as well as the three different types of unique eldritch currencies they have there with the eldritch exalted, the eldritch annul, and the eldritch chaos orb. The next type of crafting, and this is definitely again a bit more of a fringe thing. But you can technically craft with divination card turn-ins. In particular, if the item, as the one is shown here, gives you a unique that is double corrupted, for example. Because divination cards can very easily have their item levels skewed. In many cases, it would be more expedient as well as far cheaper to do certain div card turn-ins like this. than it would be to actually go about crafting it yourself with either a Vol Orb or with a Temple of Otsuado. The next crafting methodology would be Tainted Currency. Now, while Tainted Currency in its mass adoption and popular use is really focused primarily on, tainted armor scraps and fusings and blacksmith whetstones, you actually are able to do more advanced crafting with it as well, with Tainted Exalted Orbs, Tainted Chaos Orbs, Divine Blessings. It is actually a very fairly in-depth system, but it is incredibly volatile. Lots of upside, lots of downside, but it's one that doesn't get too much love given the complexity it has. The next system that exists is the Temple of Otsuado. That would really only manifest as the Locus of Corruption, which, again, works like a Vol Orb, but it does it with 2 implicits. It can go 2 implicits, all sockets white. The item will be poofed, so disappear, or it will be turned into a rare item with double influence. And the last type of crafting methodology would be Essence Crafting. You can see I didn't really put these in any specific order. Essence Crafting probably being one of the most, character user-friendly, easiest to understand. Pairs incredibly well with Fractured mods. And that brings us to the end of Section 3, Methodologies or Categorizations. At first, we learned itemization through a process of pattern recognition and being able to identify useful pairings or groupings of affixes, eliminating at quick glance what are useful and what are not useful modifiers and modifier combinations based on that item type. Crafting, conversely, is not a matter of assessing what we are seeing, but rather how what is unseen may come to be. The former being reactive and the latter being a proactive approach. We begin from our end state, knowing our eventual goal. Doing so by determining what basic item type we want, what item specialization we want, and specifically determining what modifiers we desire. The crafting process is then little more than solving a puzzle, whereby we achieve this end state through the most time-effective, cost-efficient, and controllable or deterministic way that we can, making use of the various crafting systems to do so as effectively as possible, making adjustments based on our currency, affix necessity, risk tolerance, and personal skill level. While the totality of crafting may seem overwhelming, once you begin to understand these different systems, interdependent mechanisms, and mutual exclusivities that we talked about briefly, what might seem like a process defined by its infinitude will increasingly become more narrow in scope, and with that, far more manageable. Always remember, guys, that crafting is the process of assigning modifiers to an item. When you know what it is that exactly that you want, this process becomes infinitely more clear and defined and easy. If you are finding yourself in a position whereby you are unsure of what modifier belongs on an item, this is not a crafting question or a crafting problem. It is a build problem, or rather, a problem stemming from your lack of build comprehension. When you understand your build or your archetype, you will be in a far better position to succeed with your crafts. Lastly, guys, and especially if you're new, remember to enjoy the process. Be forgiving of your mistakes when you make them. They are a collateral cost that comes with learning. That extends past PoE. While it may be hard not to measure yourself against your peers or your friends or your guild or whatever contemporaries you might have, try to avoid doing so. If you're a better crafter and a better player today than you were yesterday, you're well on your way. The person or persons that you allow yourself to be discouraged by have not gotten to that place by giving up or by being perfect all the time. Shit happens. Keep on trucking, boys. God bless. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to see a part 2 or further depth on any of these topics discussed, please let me know your thoughts. Welcome to the credits, Giga Chads. Above me, you'll find a button to subscribe to the channel. Please consider doing so if you're new. To my left, you'll find a video that I think you might enjoy if you'd like this one. And to my right, you'll find a playlist of the videos that I recommend to people who are new to the channel. Some of the best things that I've put together over the years. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope to see you soon.